Hey everyone, Saishi Ningen here, and today I was inspired to make a video response to a post in Our Buddhism about Buddhist iconography and what's known as Buddhist Aniconography. So that's the non-icon phase, and that's the first phase of the non-depiction of the Buddha. And I wanted to explain the differences in the phases of depiction of the Buddha and give some clarification as far as what the history of that is, and I think it's really interesting stuff. I've always found it to just be very fascinating, just exploring the depictions of the Buddha and how they came about. It's just really cool history that it's there to explore if you want. So I just wanted to address this post. So it says here, for 500 years after Buddha's statues were not built. Instead, only the Buddha's tree picture was worshipped. Now that statement is actually not true. The Buddha's aniconic depictions range beyond just the Bodhi tree. And so here's a number of symbols that we relate to the Buddha and the aniconic phase of Buddhism. So here on the bottom we've got the trident, and that's the royal symbol of the Buddha. And it's a reference to the triple gem, so it's the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. In the center is the Dharma wheel, and of course if we think about it spinning, it's the continual unfolding of the Dharma. In his toe joints you'll see swastikas, and those are purity, purity in intention, purity in action, purity in outcome. So that's like, holistic living. And then again, the trident's on the very tip. In the center here is the lotus, representing awakening or enlightenment, and on the sides here you see two figures who, you've got human beings, right? But you'll see them, their hands are together, and what they're doing is paying homage and veneration to these symbols. So right away that statement right there is not true. And this comes from 1st century BC, so that's well within 400 years. So let's see, and the rest says only the Buddhist tree was worshipped. It was tremendous. Those people must have understood. Just a symbol of the Bodhi tree. Again, not true. Because in that moment, Buddha completely disappeared. He was not there. Only the Bodhi tree. He was completely lost. So the reason we have this aniconic phase is because the Buddha asked not to be depicted in human form because he didn't want to be worshipped. And I know there's other stories contrary to that, but there's plenty of legends in Buddhism that we really can't verify or even contradict what we have as far as the Buddha Dharma. So this aniconic phase lasted for maybe around 400 or 500 years. And what changed in that phase was its contact with the Western world. And in particular, they came into contact with the kingdom or the empire of Gandhara, or Greco-Bactria. And so here's Alexander. Of course, he conquered all the way over here, and he had his army mutiny, so he had to turn around. Couldn't go any further into India. And if you'll pay attention to this area right here, this is going to become what's called Greco-Bactria, and it's the garrison that Alexander the Great left behind after he abandoned his conquest. So here we've got about 200 BC. This Greco-Bactrian kingdom has formed, It's around this time, so the Mauryan Empire is formed. You can see Kalinga's down here. Ashoka is going to come to power. He's going to conquer Kalinga. There's some 200,000 deaths. Of course, he's mortified by the reality of what he's done. He comes into contact with what do they call them? Vihara monks, who are like hospitalers, basically. Sees them treating for the wounded, converts to Buddhism, converts his whole empire to Buddhism, and from there he sends missionaries out from India, and 2 missionaries he sends are former, I think they're 2 lay tradesmen, and they make their way to Greco-Bactria, and they run into the king there, King Menander, and there's a sutra about King Menander, and they have this great kind of Greek dialogue back and forth in which the king challenges the missionaries to address these conundrums his kingdom is facing at the time. So he's really impressed by them. He converts to Buddhism, but the Greco-Bactrians have this long legacy of Hellenizing all the religions that they come into contact, and Buddhism is no exception. So the Greek Bactrians are really the first people to kick off the iconic phase of Buddhism. And so they do that, and let's bring up some of their depictions here. So here we have some of the first iconic images of the Buddha. And what we can see here, his eyes are still, he's got these topaz jewels for eyes, very cool. Very lifelike, and just huge hair. And one thing you'll notice is the shape of his nose to his forehead. There's no divot there. That's actually a Hellenistic depiction of the Buddha. This has no historical reference to the Buddha. We don't really have a historical reference for what the Buddha looked like. So what the Greeks are actually doing here, they're depicting the Buddha as Apollo. And so let's take a look at Apollo and what he looks like, and we'll see the similar. So you can see here Apollo, he's got the same forehead, so there's no divot there. Same here, no divot. And let's make this smaller. Okay, that helps, I think. Yeah, you can see the similarity. Let's see if we can find another one. There's another. So we've got this is the big giveaway right here, that the way that the forehead comes straight down to the nose. Very Hellenistic depiction, very indicative of that style. So here's another depiction. So you can see in this style, the robes are actually not what we would recognize for what the Buddha wore, and actually they're more in the style of the Hellenistic Greece. And so they've got these draped over robes over their body, and they're kind of semi-clad in the style of the time. The mustachioed guy. This is an arhat of who could be anybody. As far as I know. Here's another one, much the same style. See how the brow comes straight down to the nose. And you can see there he's still got pupils there. So these all come out of present day Pakistan, Kashmir area, and Afghanistan. But mostly they come out of Pakistan. But you can see he's very cool, lifelike. I kind of wonder, like, is there some sort of cover that they went with? Like, did they put something over his head or what. One of the things you'll notice if you study Buddhist iconography is just how many decapitated Buddha heads there are rolling around. The reason for that is because when the British rolled through the area, people were running to these sites which had been long abandoned, and just nobody had any interest in it. Once they figured out the British wanted these things, they were raiding these things and just breaking them off to make a quick buck, because they could run up to these things really fast, break them off, bring them back down. The British would pay them a lot of money for it, and then they might show them a site for even more money. So the result is we get a lot of decapitated Buddhas, decapitated arhats. Again, another depiction of the forehead. That's how, I'm pretty sure that's how we can tell this particular depiction is the Buddha and not just another arhat. So this is from a table. Again, you can see the depiction in the robes, the way they flow over the body. This really isn't the historic style. It's not the way Buddhists wear their robes so much. This figure right here is actually Hercules. So this is the Greeks projecting their own tradition into Buddhism. So this thing right here, he's got a thunderbolt. He's the bodyguard of the Buddha, and his name is Pajapani, I think, but he's actually originally he's brought over from the Greek mythology, and originally he's Hercules. So the Buddhists have Hercules. This is a later depiction, but it's from the same area. So if you don't know what this is, this actually came out of a stupa, and I can't read this, but I know it proclaims that the Buddha's ashes are inside of here. So they actually found a abandoned stupa. It wasn't that hard to excavate, apparently. Some British guy got in there. This proclaims to be the ashes or the relics of the Buddha, and I know it's been historically dated, so they believe it to be authentic. This is one of the depictions. This is just another general depictions, but this is like a forest spirit or a nature spirit that they just kind of capture in there. This is another Pajapani. Again, you can see the thunderbolt here, and the thunderbolt, of course, stays in Buddhist iconography as I think it's called the dorje. Here's a good example of just one of the bodies just torn out piecemeal. So somebody broke his head off for a quick buck, and then later on they made their way to the site and they actually grabbed the whole body. So here's a very Statue of Liberty style halo for the Buddha, and he's got a mustache. You can tell it's the Buddha. He's got a Dharma wheel on his hand here, and he's folded up. What's in his left? Can't exactly remember. Here's the what do we call that? The Parinibbana. Everybody's having a hard time dealing with it. These are the kings. Here's the arhats down here. Bad time in Buddha town. What do I have? That's the Kush. It's one of the last Buddhist kings in Bactria. So let's see. Go back to here. Back to here. Back to here. So Ajanta. So Ajanta caves. This is one of the first depictions. So the Gandhara stuff it really comes first, and it kind of sets the mold for everybody else. The next style, really great depictions in the Ajanta caves here. Let's open this up here. But you can see in this style the Buddha takes on a much more effeminate form, and this is inspired by the Persian style of iconography. Excuse me. cannot think clearly to speak to save my life today. But anyway, it's one of the most beautiful sites. It has this huge history of being developed. Like once they started excavating this, they never really stopped. So just generation after generation of Buddhist monks carving into this complex, and they made this huge complex. You can see it here. The thing's massive, but you can see it's dug out of the wall. I mean, people did this by hand. This took generations to do, but it's absolutely stunning. I would love to go there one day. One of the things you can tell if you study these sites is they're easily fortifiable. These places would have had very large libraries for the time. They would have stored all kinds of riches, and it explains why these places were raided again and again when these areas were conquered by foreign invaders. In the center here, this is the Buddha, and well, let's see. It's a Buddha with he's depicted as being central in the stupa, and the stupa is a depiction of what's called Mount Sumeru, and Sumeru is this central mountain, and it refers, there it is, it's good. So it refers to, it's really what we call a cosmographical map, and it's the center of mind, really. But it depicts multiple levels of heaven, and depicts the Buddha, and you can see the Buddha, he's missing his forearms, but this would have been an open hand, so Buddhist practitioners would have come before this and done prostrations, and the Buddha would be depicted here as receiving the veneration. There's another depiction. You can see how his forearm would have come up, and his hand would have been open here, and the left would have, you can see it would be extended out here, and it would be an outpouring of some sort of representation. Here's the Buddha's mom. And we can tell because it's reference to lotuses and white elephants, which is what she told the Buddha's father that she had seen prior to the Buddha's birth. Anyway, fascinating stuff. I'd love to get into it more with you guys. I think it would be really cool if we did like a live chat and we just explore this topic more, but it's a huge amount of history to get into. I mean, these are just a couple of sites, and I'd love to explore it further with you guys and see what you're interested in. So get at me on whatever social media, and we'll figure out a time we can sit down and explore this very cool stuff further. So hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Thanks.